Soham has transferred the video to me somewhere during, when I'll upload the conservation biology one, I'll upload that one. Okay, the recording is happening. Huh? What's the question?
So this is conservation bio part 2 that needs to be uploaded, right?
Yeah, yeah, the Project Tiger part. Conservation by part one is already uploaded. Huh, okay,
That's what I was asking. So,
right. Okay, so so yesterday we looked at the the mechanistic theories of aging, and we said that although there are supports for some mechanisms in some strains, etc., you don't really find a particular mechanism or a particular gene or set of genes that is uniquely implicated in terms of aging across taxa. Okay, you find specific instances, but nothing across taxa. So that brings us to the other kind of theories of aging, the evolutionary theories of aging, which basically says that aging ultimately is an inevitable outcome of the way natural selection operates. So what they say is that there is obvious truism that reproduction is contingent upon survivorship, which means that only those organisms can reproduce at a particular age who first survive up to that age. Okay, and not the other way around. You can have survivorship without reproduction, but you can't have reproduction without survivorship. Now, this is something that you guys have already seen. This is a cohort life table, and it doesn't matter. We start with some numbers, and let's say we are going from age 1 to age 50. This is just a toy numerical example. Now, let's assume that the survivorship at each time step is, when going from each time step to the next one, is 80%. Okay. So if that be the case, that's what you see here. So right at the beginning, everybody is surviving. Then it's 0.8, then it's zero point 0.8 into 0.8, 0.64, then 0.64 into 0.8, 0.51, and so on and so forth. Right. Now let's assume that the reproductive success is some number, and here we say that the reproductive success is essentially 0 for the first three age classes, and let's say one baby per age class for the rest of the life. So as far as reproduction is concerned, there is no aging happening. However, here when you are going from one age class to the next, this number can either stay constant if the probability of going from one age class to the next for some age class is 1, then it can remain constant. Otherwise it will always decrease, and since this is always going to decrease, even if this remains static as we have put in over here the multiplication of the two, the lx into mx component, this component is going to keep on steadily decreasing. Okay, so this is what is I'm showing over here, that the age specific reproductive success, which is basically this thing, lx mx, this thing has to have a fall. I mean, this is you know this is a truism. You can't really do anything about this. The only way it cannot happen is if there is a very massive increase in one of these age classes, such that whatever decrease is coming from this side gets offset by the huge value of mx over here. Okay, barring those things, this is always going to be a declining function. On the other hand, if you look at the cumulative reproductive success, it basically means you just keep on summing these numbers, you take on accumulation on these numbers, then you see that this, although it increases steeply in the beginning, at some point this is going to start flattening out. Why will it start flattening out? Because these numbers will become smaller and smaller. Okay, and these numbers will become smaller and smaller primarily because these numbers are becoming smaller and smaller, the fraction surviving number. So if this is happening, then the relative contribution of a given age class typically keeps on declining with age. Now, when the relative contribution of a given age class will keep on decreasing, then the effect of natural selection in the context of that particular, some whatever trait that you're talking about, that is also going to go down. Why is that so? That is so because, you know, what is this sum over here? This sum is the expected lifetime reproductive success, right? This is the R, lifetime fitness in some sense. The contribution of these lower or later period values, these are going to go down. And if these keep on going down, then obviously, natural, suppose, we end up truncating the evolution, truncating the lifespan right here, then the decrease that is going to happen is much more compared to, let's say, when we truncate it over here, right? So this is what is meant by saying that the effect of natural selection is going to go down with age because the fitness itself is following this kind of a pattern. Now, suppose you have a mutation which is late acting, okay, which means its effect is only seen very late in life. So just for the heck of it, let's say this is a mutation which is lethal. So essentially, going from here to here, nobody is going to survive once this mutation becomes active. Now, note that when you are taking even a lethal mutation, then given that it is acting late in life, the expected lifetime reproductive success, which in the previous case was 2.42, has simply climbed down from 2.42 to 2.34. Okay, a decrease of 0.08. That's about it, which is not too high. However, if you cause the same thing to act over here, okay, in other words, if you kill something, let's say at this level or this level, then the decrease that you get is going to be far, far more. And that is why we have this class of theory, which is the so-called mutation accumulation theory proposed in 1952, which says that if you have mutations which express only in an age specific manner, then those mutations which are expressing or showing their negative effect later in life are going to face much weaker selection compared to those which are expressing and showing their deleterious effects earlier in life, which essentially means that in the population over generations, late acting mutations are going to accumulate, and the effect of these late acting deleterious mutations is what shows up as aging. Okay? This is what is known as the mutation accumulation.
Sir, does it mean that they're going to accumulate, or does it mean that if they accumulate, they will do so at a higher rate than those accumulating at earlier stages in life? I mean, there will still be some selection pressure against these, right? It will just be lower than the one that
Exactly. So yeah, so that's what it says. It accumulates more readily. So they will
yeah.
accumulate at a higher rate, and when you accumulate this over longish time, then it's like a natural selection happening at the level of the mutation accumulation. So the late
Okay.
acting mutations will be far more numerous in the population
But
than
this
the
does not
early acting mutations.
negate the selection against the mutation itself.
It does not negate it. It says
Okay.
that the magnitude is going
Lesson.
to be lower.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, and so this is what is known as the mutation accumulation theory. There is another theory which is known as the antagonistic pleiotropic theory. What is the theory? The concept is the same. It's just that the way mutation acts is conceptualized slightly different. The idea is that the genes, when they are inside your body, many of them are affecting your, fitness or affecting your body functions, etc., across your entire lifespan. However, it is possible that when as you grow older, not in terms of aging, grow older as in terms of numerical value of your age increases, then those some mutations which are acting earlier in life, they have a different effect early in life versus their effect later in life. Sorry. So which basically means that if there are mutations which are having positive effect early in life but negative effect late in life, then such mutations are going to be favored disproportionately more in the early part, but the selection against them is going to be much less than what normally would have been if that gene is the other part is the deleterious part is expressing later in life. Okay. So this is what is known as antagonistic pleiotrope. So when one gene has multiple effects, that's pleiotrope. When the effect in one context is positive and in the other context is negative, it's called antagonistic pleiotrope. Okay. And the specific kind of antagonistic pleiotrope that is being invoked over here is in some sense the temporal antagonistic pleiotrope. So if you have mutations which promote early life uh, fitness at the cost of late life fitness, then the positive selection pressure, the positive selection favoring them is going to be much more than the negative selection against them. Therefore, on an average, such mutations are going to increase in the population. And the negative part of their effect later in life is going to show up as age. Okay. So these are the two major theories in this context. And again, we can see the same using this toy example. So the left hand side is the stuff that we discussed in the first slide. The right hand side, what happens is that this stuff actually here this mutation that we have, what it does is it allows them to start reproducing one life stage early. Okay. The reproduction rate still remains the same, it's still 1, but it allows them to start reproducing in the second or third age class at the expense of going dead earlier. Okay, at the expense of dying after the 12th one. So when this happens, note that the contribution from these 4 things, the ones in the yellow, the contribution from these 4 age classes goes to 0. However, because it has gained fitness by increasing, starting reproduction early, this thing more than enough offsets this loss, and therefore the expected lifetime reproductive success, even though you have lost 4 of the later years, the expected lifetime success actually goes from 2.42 to 2.86. Okay. So again, the logic is pretty much the same. A benefit early in life is going to have proportionately a lot more positive selection in favor of it compared to really bad things that are anyway happening lately. Okay. So is this making sense, whatever I said till now? The difference between mutation accumulation and antagonistic. Abolo?
Yes, sir. Both of these things, the metaverse theory and antagonistic pleiotrope, are contingent upon the idea that effect of natural selection goes down with age. But
Yes.
why is that a true, like a truism, a given?
That is something that is coming from here. Okay. So note that in this particular case, we are talking about this reproductive success remaining constant over their entire lifespan. Okay. Here, in terms of the fraction surviving, the fraction itself is remaining constant over their entire lifespan. So this is a population which is not aging, right? Fraction
Yeah.
surviving is also constantly processing. But
Yeah.
in spite of that, simply because the survivorship to a particular age class is contingent upon the thing surviving all the previous age classes. Therefore, this fraction surviving has to strictly go down.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That alone makes this a truism, nothing else.
So what happens if I have a species where there is a sudden late life burst in reproductive success? So in the very last part of the life, similar to what happens with asexual organisms in some sense.
Yes, yes, yes. So if you have that, then essentially this part is not going to work. Okay. So, but if you have that, then the prediction is going to be that that thing is not going to age at least till that reproductive spike happens.
And are there examples of that?
Let's go there. It's part
Okay.
of the discussion. Okay. So, if we try to compare these two theories, what this is saying is the mutation accumulation theory is saying is that as far as the performance or fitness, whatever you call, there won't be any differences in the early part of the life. It's only in the later half that the fitness or the performance is going to go down because you have late acting mutations accumulating in the population. On the other hand, the antagonistic pleiotropy theory is explicitly saying that a drop later in life is going to be accompanied by some kind of an increase earlier in life. Okay, so you will see a perfect trade-off kind of a thing. Practically speaking, designing experiments to differentiate between the two hypotheses, even if you have a very clear prediction like this, is actually pretty difficult. And it's particularly difficult to do it for the mutation accumulation experiments. We'll talk about one or two of those experiments in the next few minutes. But as I said, it's not very crystal clear. Bolo.
So even if we set aside experiments, that same
Mhm.
logic which you had given us with the mechanistic theories, like Drosophila has been around for hundreds of years, it should for hundreds of millions of years, it should have eliminated aging. Would in the mutation accumulation theory, since the selection pressure does not vanish over long enough scales, you should expect the mutations to disappear, right? So you could make the
Correct,
same argument.
correct. But if the selection pressure is very weak,
Hmm.
okay, then you can make the argument that that weak a selection pressure. See, that initial argument that I was making was with the assumption that selection against anything that reduces survivorship, that reduces fecundity, is going to be strong.
Okay.
What this is saying is that that is not the case. The selection under this particular set of conditions that I am putting, the selection is actually going to be substantially weaker.
Okay.
So therefore, you don't get into that anymore. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So one support for the mutation accumulation theory comes from the work of Hughes et al. Okay. So the logic is slightly convoluted. It's a slightly indirect thing, and it is being done through inbreeding depression. Okay. So what it is saying is that inbreeding depression is typically caused by deleterious recessive alleles. We know that. Okay. Now, what mutation accumulation is saying is that late acting deleterious mutations are going to be at a higher frequency than early acting deleterious mutation. So, if we track this in terms of inbreeding depression, then so inbreeding depression is now kind of acting as a proxy. Then inbreeding depression, the effect of inbreeding depression should become more severe with age. Okay, that's the prediction. Is this making sense?
Yes, sir. It makes sense.
Anybody else is having a trouble with this? Okay. So what these guys did was they took Drosophila melanogaster populations, 10 of them. which were highly inbred. Then they did all possible crosses. Okay, so 10 into 10, 100 crosses. Now, out of these 100 crosses, along the diagonal, 10 of them are basically the line crossing with itself. So those 10 are still remaining inbred. Whereas in all those cases where the line is not crossing with itself, those are outbred, right? So since there are 10 into 10, 100 possibilities, out of which the diagonal 10 are inbred, the remaining 90 are outbred. So that's how they reach the 90 outbred and 10 inbred progeny population. And then they measure the age specific fecundity in both of them, all the outbreds and all the inbreds. And then essentially what they do is they take the difference between the outbred and the inbred, and that difference is what they are calling as the inbreeding depression. Now, why do they have to do it this way? Because we know that as aging happens, then the the fecundity is anyway going to go down. That is known. But what they're really trying to see is that whether the inbreeding guys, the fecundity goes down at a faster rate compared to the outbreeding guys. And the difference is what they are taking as a measure of inbreeding depression in the inbred guys. And
Sir, small question. How do you measure fecundity?
sorry, fecundity is simply how many eggs are laid.
Okay.
That's by definition fecundity. Okay? So what you have over here is age in days, and what you have on y-axis is the inbreeding depression, which is defined as average fecundity of the outbred minus the inbred scaled by that of the outbred. Okay, so if you take this quantity, you can see that this thing is essentially increasing over time, which means that the difference between the outbred and the inbred is going up, as time progresses, which suggests that the inbreeding depression is increasing with age. And therefore, if you agree with this, this supports the mutation accumulation theory, in the sense that the inbred populations have late acting stuffs which are only coming out later in life, and therefore support for mutation accumulation. Make sense?
Sir, I had a question about the data here. Around 28 days, the inbreeding depression is seeming to converge to a point. Is it like just a
That's
fact
right.
of the data, or like?
No, this is most probably just artifact. There is
Okay,
no
okay,
theory which suggests that it will first go like this, then it will go like
okay, fine.
Sir,
that.
there are no error bars on the graph. Like, is this the like this just looks very strange.
Yes, true. I think what they're simply doing is they're taking the mean of the outbred and because there are 90 of outbred, right? And they're
Yeah.
taking the mean of the inbred, and that's how they're doing it. In order to get the error bars, you'll need to do this in blocks.
Okay.
Okay. I don't think they have done it that way. I mean, this is a hell of a lot of work to begin with.
Yeah, that's also true. Sir, can you not validate this mutation accumulation thing using transcriptomics? Like, if you can figure out, so if you can figure out which like what mutation on an mRNA is corresponding to something deleterious, then you can actually track across
that if is a
age.
big if, no? So then essentially you are telling me that I will be able to figure out the function of every single transcript across the entire age.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Sure.
also
Sure.
you have this is working, so it's not going to be easy.
Sure.
Okay. So turns out that there is quite a bit of support for the antagonistic pleiotropy theory as well. So this is work coming from where is this? This is Sweden, I think. Yeah, Sweden, on these birds called collared flycatchers. So what they did was they took you have birds, some birds which start breeding early in life, Whereas there are some birds who wait a little and then start breeding. Okay, so these are the first part kind are known as early breeders. The second are known as late breeders. So if you look at if you take early breeders and then see their clutch size. Clutch size is how many eggs are being laid in a particular season in one shot. So if you look at their clutch size, these guys who are starting to breed early, they have relatively lower clutch sizes. So these numbers over here are sample sizes. So these 5.8, 6, these are the clutch sizes. And if you see their clutch size increases only slightly and then comes down. Okay. Whereas those guys who are starting breeding late, they are actually able to produce much larger number of babies. So on an average, they are able to produce about 1.2 extra eggs per clutch size. And if you look at it, their thing also comes down, but their thing even after coming down is still much higher than those guys who are breeding late. Okay. Suggesting that all those guys who breed early, they actually pay a cost over their entire life by having much lower clutch sizes at every generation, at every subsequent year of their life. Interestingly, in spite of this, if you do that life table calculation that we showed you, then if you look at the lifetime reproductive success, the sigma LXMX, the sigma LXMX is still greater for these guys as compared to these. Okay, suggesting that it is possible that if you have early realization of fitness, that can in some times trade off with late realization of fitness, which is what antagonistic pleiotropic theory is all about. Another major and more clean support for this comes from the O and the B populations. The O, remember, are the ones which have been selected for later reproduction, and therefore they have about twice or more than twice lifespan compared to the control B population. So remember, the B are being forced to reproduce early. Okay, and therefore you expect a trade-off between the early life and the late life fecundity, both in the O's and the B's, except that it's going to go in the opposite direction. And very interestingly, you find that. Okay, so in the early part of the life, which is where the bees are being forced to reproduce, the bees have a greater fecundity. However, in the later part of the life, the bees have a lower fecundity compared to the O's. So it's just opposite. So those guys who are reproducing early in life, their late life reproduction goes down. Those guys who are reproducing late in life, their early life reproduction goes down. Okay. So this is again consistent with the prediction of the antagonistic pleiotropy hypothesis. Now, in all these cases, we have been thinking about the fitness arising due to intrinsic reasons. However, in many cases, the fitness can happen due to extrinsic reasons. Okay, and this is something that I think someone was talking about in the last class about what happens if mortality is something that is coming from the environment. Will that have an effect on age? So let's take this scenario. So this is when the mortality is coming from outside. It's called ecological mortality. Okay. So suppose you have reduced ecological mortality, which means left to themselves, the organisms will be, will have a lower probability of dying of natural causes or of external causes, and therefore they have a possibility of, spreading out their reproduction for a longish time. In all these cases, if these organisms end up dying early, they lose fitness, and therefore the selection on late acting deleterious mutations is going to be higher. On the other hand, if you have increased ecological mortality, then that means they really need to reproduce fast, and because anything that is happening towards the later part of the life contributes relatively less to their overall fitness, and therefore there is decreased selection on late acting antagonistic action, or late acting mutations, or late acting antagonistic action of pleiotropic alleles. So just to make it simple, when you have reduced ecological mortality, increased selection on late acting deleterious mutation, which means that aging will be postponed. So this is what I mean by such individuals. Such individuals, refers to this one, and vice versa. Okay. So is the prediction becoming clear how this is operating?
Yes, sir.
Everybody? Why increased ecological mortality means faster aging? And the opposite of that is what I have written over here, which is applying for the first one. Okay. So this was put to empirical test by a man called Ostad, and he was working on Virginia opossums. Okay, so these are marsupials, and as you can see, they look like rodents. And there were two populations. One was a population in the mainland, which suffered from high rates of mortality, high rates of predation. In other words, they had increased ecological mortality. And the other was an island population, which had low rates of predation, and therefore there was increased selection on late acting mutation. So essentially, these guys, the island guys, okay, that's low rate of predation, this one, they are the ones who were predicted to age slower. Those are the ones who are predicted to age faster. So there are three graphs over here. I'll walk you through them. So this is proportion surviving. Okay. And as you can see, in mainland, the proportion surviving is much steeper. In this one, the proportion surviving is much shallower. Okay. So for a given age, a higher proportion is surviving in the island population, which means that natural selection is still getting a chance to operate on these guys. Now, if you look at what is happening in terms of aging, so this over here, what they are saying, giving is litter mass. Litter mass essentially is what is the weight of all the babies that are born in a litter. And what they're showing here is this one is for mainland, this one is for island, and the green ones are for first year, and the blue one is for second year. You can see that in the mainland, going from the first year to the second year, the litter mass is dropping, which means that these guys are not able to give same amount of energy or resources to reproduction. On the other hand, if you look at the island population, you'll see that the red, and here the red is the first, yellow is the second. You can see that there is essentially no difference between the red and the yellow, which means that between their first year and second year, they are able to channelize the same amount of energy into their litters, which means that they are essentially feeling no effect of aging as far as reproduction is concerned. These guys are. And if you look at body function, so what these guys looked at was the breaking time for collagen fibers. So you know that these are connective tissues, and when you are young, these tissues are more supple, and when you become old, then these tissues become much harder. And that's pretty much what you are finding over here. So if you look at these guys, the red ones are the mainland, you see that their tissues are becoming harder much faster compared to the island guys, suggesting that in terms of this particular body function, these guys are aging faster, the mainland guys are aging faster, the island guys are aging slower, which is what is written over here. Okay. So just to conclude, organisms, I mean, this is obviously for the evolutionary part of it, organisms age because selection overlooks those who live to late life, and or because selection, this is what mutation accumulation is talking about, and not because selection favors individuals that seek early benefits, even if there is a cost to it later in life. So that's the antagonistic pleiotrope theory. And these two things need not necessarily be entirely mutually exclusive. And as I said, that as far as the literature is concerned, you find support for both sets of theory. The good thing about these evolutionary theories is that the supports for these are actually more widespread across multiple taxa than for any of the more mechanistic theories. However, at the same time, these theories are much harder to check for as compared to the mechanistic theories. So that's where the whole thing is. Yeah, this is pretty much it as far as this particular topic is concerned. We still have a few minutes, so if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Let me quickly look at the chat box. Oh, there is nothing in the chat.
Sir, are all of these studies just limited to animals, or have there been some in other kingdoms also?
The microbial part we quickly discussed yesterday, right? That aging in
Mhm.
microbes is something that is relatively less studied for obvious reasons. Uh, Aging in plants, I don't know. I mean, I haven't come across too many of those, but then I haven't been looking either. So I won't be able to give you a good answer about aging in.
See, what I'm trying to understand is why the expression of a gene, or what would be the prerequisite for the expression of a gene to vary temporally in this fashion, and like that would require having some separate phases, like distinct phases in one's life, right? The way and
See,
some animals have a post-reproductive phase, and
see, the problem, the point is, you know, we know that genes have temporal profiles of expression. Okay. So as far as the mutation accumulation thing is concerned, that is very easy to see. As far as your question was probably in the context of the antagonistic pleiotropy thing, right? Now, if you have temporal profile of gene expression, then let's say I have a gene A, which in the absence of the product of gene B has one effect. In the presence of the same thing, it has a different effect. So, gene now, if gene B has a temporal profile of expression, then gene A will show up as antagonistic pleiotropic over time.
yes, sir, I understand that. I'm trying to figure
Right?
out what you say about the temporal profile. Is that true for all species, all taxa, or does it have any
Temporal,
requirement in terms of how the life cycle will be?
I don't think so. I think temporal, expression or variation in temporal expression of genes is something that's pretty well documented. I don't think that is limited to just a few taxa.
Because like if we look at plants, at least the way we studied plant physiology in school, it
Hmm.
was always that after a certain point it's just it's just an open growth plant. It just keeps growing wherever it gets sunlight, it behaves. So it's a seasonal expression of different kinds of genes that we did study, but we didn't study anything in the physiology of plants that would require a shift from early life to late life in gene expression. I mean, that could just be something missing in the 12th grade syllabus, obviously. I'm just
Hmm.
trying to think of some clear distinction between early and late life. I can't
In
think of
plants.
in plants. In humans and other animals it's easy.
Yeah. Uh, I don't know, but I know this is anecdotal evidence that when plants grow old, then the number of fruits that they produce often goes down. And I'm talking trees here, not even plants. Okay. And when plants grow old, sometimes the kind of fruits that they produce, that also ends up changing and so on. So I won't be surprised if such a thing happens. But then if you ask me to give an example off the top of my head, I cannot.
Okay, sure.
Hmm. Yeah. Now I'm just looking at a review on this topic, and this early on in the second paragraph itself says the plant scientist's vocabulary of aging, life history, and senescence is or should be used in a very different way from the gerontologist, despite employing a number of common expressions. So these guys are starting with how to define, aging in plants. That looks like a naughty problem to begin with. Anyway, anything else?
So some questions are piling up in the chat.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the chat. Uh, so we started by defining aging as loss in, fecundity and a loss, general reduction in survivorship rates, or if you want to combine the two, a general reduction in fitness over age. I mean, I defined it explicitly. Uh, all this gives us reason as to why selection has not eliminated aging, not why aging happens. No, this is also giving an answer to the same question. Because mutation accumulation is explicitly saying that the late acting mutations are deleterious. Therefore, the deleterious effects are showing up as aging. Similarly, the antagonistic pleiotropy thing is saying that the mutations that promote fitness early in life have a negative effect in late in life. So again, this negative effect is what is showing up as aging. So in this particular case, it is giving answers to both questions at the same time. Yes, TOR pathway is present in multiple organisms, that is true, but the effect of the TOR pathway on senescence is not the same in multiple organisms, right?
I thought it was same. Like they were using this rapamycin and
Right.
so
Rapamycin
on
was used in
mTOR
flies,
one,
huh? Hmm.
so on mTOR one they saw that the effect increased the lifespan, but the same effect on mTOR two had some deleterious effect.
That is fine, but that was found in flies, right? Was it also reported in other organisms?
Yes, mice and C. elegans, I think.
Aha. Okay, that's actually pretty decent. I'll have to see where, what exactly is the situation with the TOR pathway. I know for a fact that what you're saying is true for flies. The others I'll have to.
Okay.
I think the last question is the critical one. How is the exam pattern going to be? And to be very frank, I have no idea. The reason I have no idea is because I'm waiting to see what solution these guys come up with for taking the exam. So they have said that they will hire some external agencies, but which one they hire and what platform they hire, what is the what are the things that the platform can do is pretty much what is going to be you know determine what the exam pattern will be. I have no clue. I only know that these guys are working on it, and frankly speaking, you guys will probably get to hear about it much earlier than I do.
So do we know if
Okay.
it's an open book or something?
I have no clue. Yeah, seriously.
So if you
Hmm.
had that independent option, do you think you could allow that?
Open book.
Yeah, it's a lot of syllabus, irrespective of the fact that we probably have to think through the paper. It helps to kind of just have something to refer to or be allowed to do so.
I'll have to think about it, because honestly speaking, it also depends on how long they are going to give us to correct the answer sheet. Okay. Because any open book question obviously can't be factual. Open book questions have to be thought provoking, right? And if you give a thought provoking question and 240 of you guys, think on it, then we need to spend an enormous amount of time to parse through those thoughts. If these guys give me like 3 days or 5 days to upload the results, then I can't give you guys open book questions. You see my problem, right? So
Yeah, definitely.
that's why I'm saying it depends on what system they take and what time frame they give us to correct your answer. It's entirely a pragmatic decision as far as I'm concerned. What happens if you eliminate ecological mortality altogether? Actually, you can do it. Okay, you can't eliminate it, but you can make it really small. That is what happens under very controlled breeding conditions. So for example, if you are in a fishery, okay, or if you are in a piggery, or okay, or any kind of, let's say, even well maintained conserved forest. Okay, conserved forest may you will have other species interacting, so ecological mortality will not go down entirely. But yeah, any kind of animal husbandry scenario is where that thing works. Uh, if you have that, then reduced ecological mortality means now the organisms can kind of live as long as they can possibly can, and therefore the selection on late life actually goes up. When selection on late life actually goes up, then that will mean reduced aging. Okay, not the other way around. Yeah, that's exactly what you have written. So no aging. That will probably kind of over evolutionary time scale, that is the best selection that you can have for no aging. Agreed.
So basically, ecological mortality is one of the primary reasons for aging in
It is one
evolutionary
of the
time.
reasons. It is one of the reasons. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. See, the point is that there, I mean, when I say ecological, I mean everything else, all stochastic, etc., everything else taken out. All right.
Yeah, like even cancer, maybe.
Everything. So yeah, if that be the case, then that is probably the best way for selecting for no aging. Agreed.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, Shudipto, that's the kind of stuff that we get. The guy who gives the exam right at the end, last day, gets about 3 to 4 days. It's a pain. It's a massive pain. No, death doesn't cause aging. Ecological, but that's exactly what I ended up showing you guys. No? That's the ecological mortality part. So if you have increased ecological mortality, then your probability, your later part essentially is not contributing to your fitness, or contributing much less to your fitness in a probabilistic sense, and therefore natural selection is going to get relaxed at that part. So that's what will cause aging. Mouse utopia experiment, which one is that?
These were the studies conducted in the 60s or so by like having mouse societies in like large kennels and like seeing and in like proper conditions with like food supply and everything, and just seeing, observing over time how the society develops. And they showed that over time, like there are massive behavioral defects that arise later in life if there is no external, not exactly mortality, but any external input of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay,
like this was considered as a proxy for like very many political reasons. But yeah, this was the main study behind it.
in Switzerland by any chance, the study?
Um, I couldn't hear you. Could you repeat that?
Is this from Switzerland? Switzerland.
Uh, no, I
Okay.
don't
Yeah,
think so. Somewhere in Alabama, I think.
okay.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, no, I also need to look it up. I'm not aware of this one. It says mouse, it also says rat. Maybe there are two of those. Oh, started with rats and then moved to mice. Oh, interpreted as evidence of what would happen in an overpopulated world. So that essentially means these guys were probably also looking at food shortage. Otherwise, there won't be overcrowding, right?
No, but initially there wasn't any overcrowding.
Uh-huh.
It just happened over time.
Ah,
They weren't intentionally overcrowding.
okay. Yeah. See, the point is ecological mortality can even happen from intraspecific crowding, right? So even if there is no food shortage, you can have all kinds of other issues. I mean, behavioral issues is one thing that you are talking about. So true reduction of ecological mortality is not an easy task. I mean, you can reduce it, but true elimination of ecological mortality, I should say, is not an easy task. I should look this up. There is a similar study in Switzerland. That's a very, very sophisticated study. But in that case, it's not a closed system. The mice are allowed to go out of the barn and forage in the field if they want. Oh, okay. I'll
What is
look
it
this
called
up.
exactly?
Which
The
one?
Swiss study?
Yes. Ah, I've forgotten. Two ladies doing it. University of Zurich में है. Allah. It's not coming to my mind right now. Just drop me an email. I'll search. The first name I think is Barbara. I forget the second name of the lady. Anyway, just drop me an email. I'll figure it out and I'll write back to you. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, chalo. I think I should stop the recording. People are stuck. Ruchita, this is going to your Google Drive. Okay.
Yes, I'll transfer the ownership.
Sorry.